This lore episode is designed to talk about not only the founding of the Paladin Order, but also important events, characters, and items that have happened from Warcraft and the RTS to Dragonflight. So yes, it's going to be a long episode. Strap in, and I hope you enjoy. Welcome, fellow adventurers, to another episode of the Valley of Spirits. Today, we find ourselves in a place where the light shines its brightest, the majestic Cathedral of Light in the heart of Stormwind City. Just beyond the towering stone pillars, the choir practices their hymns, their voices weaving through the air like a gentle holy mist, their melodies faintly reaching us here in the cathedral's library, where the scent of old parchment and leather-bound tomes fills the air. Here, in this haven of knowledge, we gather to delve into the rich tapestry of Azeroth's history. Though I hail from the Horde, today I walk these sacred halls of the Alliance. An uneasy feeling lingers on the edge of my thoughts, a slimy reminder of the border crossings and the tensions that persist between our factions. Yet, it is here that we must come to understand the origins of the Paladin, a class born of faith, honor, and sacrifice. From the early days of the Knights of the Silver Hand to the modern champions of light, the Paladin story is one of noble beginnings and steadfast resolve. Join me as we turn the pages of history, exploring the manuscripts and chronicles that detail the birth and rise of the Paladins. We will uncover the roots of their divine calling, their trials they faced, and the legacy they have built in their relentless pursuit of justice and protection. This is the Valley of Spirits, and today we shed light on the noble origins of the Paladin. Our story starts after the First War. The Orcish Horde had laid siege to the capital of Stormwind, the city in ruins, and her people set sail to the shores of Lordaeron. Take note, adventurer. This is not the Horde that we know today. Rather, it's the Old Horde, one of demon-worshipping and drinking of demonic blood. Now let me find that tome on the beginnings of the Second War. Where did I put it last? Here we go. The Second War and the creation of the Knights of the Silver Hand. After the First War and the destruction of Stormwind by the Orcish Horde, the remaining forces of Stormwind and its citizens fled across the Great Sea to Lordaeron. As other human nations amassed at Lordaeron for the coming of the Second War, the leader Anduin Lothar needed a way to bind these nations together under a single banner. Clerics were an obvious choice to provide a common ground for the Alliance nations to bind together. Yet, during the First War, the Holy Order of Northshire clerics seemed to have been mostly deleted by orcs and their abbey overrun and given to the Twilight's Hammer clan. So it's fair to say that the clerics can't really be something to rally behind when they can't defend their special tomes in the abbey. The overseers of the Northshire clerics, the Church of the Holy Light, wanted to build an order that would not suffer such loss in battle. The Archbishop Enolis Fowl met with Anduin Lothar and offered to create a new order, one that would be trained to wield the light, but also be trained in leadership and the arts of warfare. Enolis gathered a small mix of priests and knights so that he could respectfully train them in the ways of the light and martial combat. Among these selections were Tirion, a priest who later would help create what is now known as the Alliance; Uther, a pious believer and knight who was already apprenticed under Fowl for some years; Gavin Rand the Dyer, a veteran of the First War and Knight of Stormwind. These 5 students, who would later become known as Paladins, still for the time being, they stayed with the Alliance army and would train day and night in both the ways of the light and warfare. Archbishop introduced them to simple lives and placed the well-being of others above their own. As trading progressed, each of these new Paladins would be given a librum, basically a magical book. From the Archbishop, each librum was what the Archbishop believed was a core trait of the Silver Hand and challenged each Paladin to embody their trait. Tirion was given the Librum of Protection, Dethrohan was given the Librum of Holiness, Fordring was given the Librum of Retribution, Uther given the Librum of Justice, Gavin Rad was given the Librum of Compassion. Before setting foot on the battlefield, Uther was appointed first to the Paladins, followed by Tirion, Tirion, and Givenrad. As time progressed in training, Lothar would repeatedly check on the newly found order, becoming so pleased that he requested Tirion and Uther to serve as his lieutenants. Their first engagement with the Horde would take place at the Battle of Hillsbrad Foothills, where they rode into battle with the Alliance, bolstering their fellow soldiers with hope and courage. As they healed the wounded and fought back against the Death Knights, the battle would end with an Alliance victory, forcing the Horde back into the hinterlands and quell the loss. During these first few months of the Second War, the Archbishop would seek out others to add to the Order's ranks. In time, their numbers would rise from original 5 to 14 Paladins, led by Uther. This new order was seen as almost unstoppable. This force would provide much of the support needed by the Alliance to defeat the Horde. During the siege of Blackrock Spire, Lothar and Doomhammer faced off on the battlefield. Doomhammer narrowly succeeded in killing Lothar, although his death did not have the effect he thought it would for the Paladin forces, trying to break their morale. During this battle, Tirion, who had not yet learned to master the power of light, learned to do so. Having fought and disarmed Doomhammer, Tirion struck him unconscious so he may face trial for his crimes. After the battle was won, the Alliance forces fell to Tirion, who bestowed the title of the Lightbringer upon Uther. A week after, Tirion had led the remaining Alliance forces against the Orcs at their last stand at the Dark Portal. During this battle, Uther the Lightbringer and his fellow Paladins of the Order destroyed the portal. This caused the remaining Orcs to either surrender, continue fighting, or flee. Thus, the Second War ended.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. It was a group of freaking... If it wasn't for those pesky Paladins, I would have got away with it, too.
Yeah, Stormwind would have been Orc, too.
Right. Very exciting. A lot of cool names in there.
Yeah, and very well-known names, too.
Yep, Tirion, Dathrohan, Tirion, Uther. Very cool. Very cool.
Well, and that's how Uther ends up getting... to the Second War is how he gets the Lightbringer title. He's not just bestowed with it instantly because he's a paladin. He earns it. The interluding years, in between the Second War and the Third War. After the Second War was finished, the Order of the Silver Hand worked with the Church of the Holy Light to help the Alliance of Lordaeron heal from the effects of the war, helping curb the Orcish threat through the building and guarding of internment camps. As time went on, there was the invasion of Draenor. Tirion had journeyed into the Dark Portal with his forces after Ner'zhul opened his portals to other worlds. The energies required to keep the portals open started to tear the fabric of Draenor apart. As they fought their way back to Azeroth, Tirion and Khadgar agreed that they would stay behind and close the Dark Portal on their side. Sadly, it did not kill Khadgar, which is why he's still around.
That's all I have. A cute chuckle. That's all I have to say.
The Silver Hand decided to continue training additional Paladins, even after reaching out to the Dwarves of Ironforge and some High Elves before the Third War happened. While the Order continued to grow, Tyr's Guard felt an affinity for the Silver Hand, learning how to wield the light and adopt better training so that they may better conduct their duty to protecting Tyr's tomb. Even after the Second War and the invasion of Draenor, the Order was called on to resolve another issue that was still lingering from the war. The Kingdom of Alterac, led by King Aidan Paranol, who had let Orcs march freely through their lands during the Second War. The kingdom was still under martial law from the Second War as a temporary solution from Davil Prestor, who was actually Deathwing in disguise. As leaders of the Alliance negotiated a solution to the crisis, Davil, or Deathwing, manipulated these leaders into giving him the throne of the kingdom, even going as far as to ostracize the Kirin Tor from the lands and marry Lordaeron's princess to better his political position. These plans were foiled with the Silver Hand's Paladins, Ronan and Varisa Windrunner being sent by the Kirin Tor to save the Dragon Queen Alex Raza from Grim Patol. This led to the Battle of Grim Patol, forcing Deathwing to flee. After this, the Kingdom of Alterac was partially annexed by the Kingdom of Lordaeron. Being the only military force that all the leaders of the Alliance trusted, the Silver Hand would conduct protection and surveillance of the lands. This trust of the Knights of the Silver Hand led to a time of lasting peace. Uther would settle civil disputes, quelling uprisings throughout the realm for a while. Soon, news began to whisper through the world of an upstart war chief starting to rally the few remaining Orc clans. This forced King Taranas to send Uther and his paladins to put a stop to the upstart war chief. This proved to be more difficult than the Order thought, as he utilized hit-and-run tactics against the Paladin Order. During the same time, the Order was also protecting the borders of Quel'Thalas against the Trolls. It's also where Arthas first gained some fame for his counterattack against the Forest Trolls. However, during his actions, Kaldherin Falmar was slain by trolls. I believe this is the first time a paladin's actually fallen in combat at this point. His armor was retrieved from the battlefield and given to his father. The Unbreakable Vow, Asaris Thar no Derador, which translates to, by blood and honor we serve. It's archaic human words often found on the cover of religious tomes across Azeroth. During this time, Tirion Fordring, one of the original paladins, now governor of the Principality of Hearthglen, while out traveling his holdings one day, came across an older orc living in an abandoned tower. The two traded blows at first sight and continued to do so until a chunk of the tower fell on top of Tirion, knocking him out cold. Days later, he awoke in his own bed. He had been found tied to his saddle, badly beaten, ribs broken, and his arm was sliced open. His apprentice had found him and healed him during those few days. Tirion had realized that the old orc he had fought had saved his life. Having retraced his steps, he found the orc once more, though this time the two did not trade blows. Rather, they traded history. And Tirion now knew the old orc as Eotrig.
Woo!
Eotrig. Learning that the orcs were not just a demon-worshipping race, as the humans had always thought, but rather that their shamanistic origins, and how their noble society was corrupted by Kil'jaeden and his demonic powers. That day, Tirion swore to Eotrig to keep his existence a secret. Yet on his return, and informing the people that the orc had been dealt with, his apprentice speculated otherwise, and called Lord Commander Sadian Dratharohan. After receiving the news, the Lord Commander rallied his men and headed for Hearthglen. On searching the woods, they found the trail leading to Eotrig. During the struggle of his capture, Tirion fought against the Lord Commander and his men. Gleefully, his apprentice makes note of his treacherous actions. Due to this, Tirion was brought to Stratholme to stand trial for his actions protecting an orc and assaulting Alliance soldiers. The council that Tirion stood before was comprised of Admiral Dalian Proudmoore, Archmage Antonidas, Archbishop Anolius Fowl, and Prince Arthas Menethil. During the trial, Tirion, hoping to be a good example to his son, informed the jury of exactly what took place. This led to the jury ultimately deciding that since Tirion had assaulted Alliance soldiers, he could no longer serve as a Knight of the Silver Hand and was doomed to exile. Uther the Lightbringer was called upon to perform a ceremony to strip Tirion of his light. Waving his hand over him, Tirion felt the light leave his body. As his powers were removed from him, darkness and despair set over the once proud paladin. Realizing that he could no longer use his powers, he was unable to stop the continued feeling of hopelessness as he was cast into darkness of the world. As a last token of respect to the once fellow paladin, Uther did not exile Tyrion's family. Tirion had returned home for the last time to gather supplies and to say goodbye to his wife and son. Still holding on to the debt that he owed Eotrig for saving his life, he rode for Stratholme in an attempt to rescue Eotrig. Even having the element of surprise, as he faced off against Eotrig's guards, they were able to subdue the exiled paladin. This was until a group of orcs decided to storm the city gates, providing them with a distraction to escape the city. Fighting their way out, as they reached the forest, Tirion realized that Eotrig was near death. Doing the only thing he knew how to do, Tirion called on the light to save the dying orc. To Tyrion's surprise, he held a connection to the light. His powers may have been stripped by Uther, but his spiritual connection could not be taken from anyone. His hand glistened like the sun, placing it on the wounded orc, healing him as he had healed so many Alliance soldiers before. Almost instantly after the light had faded from Tyrion's hand, they were surrounded by the same orcs who had attacked the city, and that upstart war chief, known as Thrall. During the standoff, the three conversed, and it became clear that the Horde had returned to the original roots of shamanism. Thrall invited Eotrig back into the Horde, which he happily accepted. But before leaving with his people, Eotrig announced that Tirion himself were brothers, bound by blood and honor. Through the actions to repay a debt, Tirion gained the undying respect of Thrall, one of the few humans ever to do so, and continues to this day. Tirion continued to live in Lordaeron, but in the shadows as a hermit, and an outcast to society. His wife told their son that he had died some years past, even taking him to a false grave at the Undercroft, where his son, Talion, in memory of his father, buried the toy warhammer that he gave him. Tirion, throughout all this time, wrote letters of love and farewell to his son as he watched over him from afar. When his son was inducted into the Knights of the Silver Hand, Tirion risked his own life, secretly attending his son's ceremony, and even being noticed by his friend Arden. Yet Arden took no action against the exiled paladin and was rather pleased to see him. Prior to the Third War, fearing that Thrall would manage to gather and train all of the remaining orcs in hiding in the lands of Lordaeron, King Tirion ordered Uther and his Knights of the Silver Hand, along with his son, to ride to southern Lordaeron to finish the job. While in the Alterac Mountains, the Paladins faced off against bandits of the Syndicate, a criminal organization led by the remaining nobles of the Kingdom of Alterac. They also encountered and fought against the Blackrock clan, who had captured citizens and were sacrificing them to the Burning Legion, as the clan had turned back to the demonic ways and demon worshipping of the old Horde. In the meantime, rumblings of a subset of the Knights of the Silver Hand started to gather around High General Abendis. These paladins were intolerant of the lesser races.
One of the very few humans to ever have an undying respect for Thrall.
Other way around. One of the few humans that Thrall respects.
Oh, okay.
Because of his actions.
I'm glad we clarified that.
Yeah. It's because of what he did for Eotrig.
Well, and what he did for all the orcs, too.
Right.
Yeah, he's a cool dude.
Yeah, Tyrion's one of my favorite characters on the Alliance side. I think he has a killer story when it comes to his lore and his background, and that's one of the small chunks of his entire story that is absolutely fantastic. And there's more later that's going to come up, too, that I don't want to spoil because it's farther down in the timeline for the Paladin Order. But it's just so good about how he keeps his word to even someone that he's supposed to despise and hate. And you can start seeing the rumblings of... No, go ahead.
A lot of integrity. He has a lot. That's really cool.
Yeah, that's why I like him. And that's... when we talk about lore, that's where I start to get off of it's so important to have great characters and have them follow. You know, if you build them to have these style of feelings, or you build someone who has a lot of integrity, will follow the moral code and do good and do the justice that needs to be done kind of thing, and not just go, well, we changed him up, in 5 minutes. Kind of like how I think we were talking about Sylvanas Windrunner when we were talking about our favorite characters in WoW.
Yep, I do remember that.
And how they kind of just injected shit into her at the end and changed her up, and I was like, I don't know.
Go crazy. That's
exactly.
She went mad, right?
Right. You can't, even if you have a character on the opposing faction, if you write them good enough, players are going to see that and they're going to be like, that's fucking badass. Like, Tirion is a badass in my book. I know you got a couple Alliance characters that you are actually like from their story.
I do. It's just, the thing is, the Alliance leaders get written into a lot of stuff, and so there's some books where I really like Tyrande and Malfurion, and there's some books where I don't like Tyrande and Malfurion so much.
Exactly.
So they've just been in a lot of stuff, I guess. Pick your poison, right? You want our leaders to be everywhere or nowhere? I guess somewhere in between would be sweet, but. Right.
Well, and that ties into the whole talk we've had, I think, numerous times about the Horde not having representation up top. Like, our guys aren't helping with anything.
Right. But I think it's time we got back to talking about Paladins, isn't it?
Yes. Keep going back into Paladins. The rumblings of the Third War. After the defeat of the Second War, the old war chief Ner'zhul was captured by Kil'jaeden. As punishment for his failure, his body was destroyed and his soul was tortured until he swore to serve the Legion once more. His soul was encased in a suit of armor and bound to the Frozen Throne. Kil'jaeden hurled his body down to Azeroth. It smashed into the ice-crowned glacier. This was the birth of the Lich King. Slowly, he seized control of the continent of Northrend.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
So Kil'jaeden just hurled his body down to Azeroth, and it's smashed into the glacier, and it was the birth of the Lich King. Nobody had to put on the helmet or pick up Frostmane or anything like that? Or is this not established yet? So this is the very beginning.
So this is how the Lich King becomes it. Like, for instance, the Lich King oversees all of the Scourge, right?
Right.
So when Arthas is going through and slaughtering Lordaeron and just pillaging the land, he's still not the Lich King. He's actually in service of the Lich King. It's not until he puts the helmet on does he really become the Lich King.
Okay. No, just a good clarification.
Yeah. No, it was something that I actually learned through doing this. I was like, I thought he just picked up Frostborn and poof, there he is.
Right.
Like, whoop, there it is. No, it's not. It's very much like he has a long time of servitude, and I guess it's to build a story arc into turning into darkness, and then putting the helmet on is solidifying it. Because if you go watch
it's when nail in the coffin.
Yeah, it's that last nail in the coffin kind of thing. Because if you go watch the little episode that happens when you kill him the first time or whenever it happens at Ice Crown, his dad, I think his dad pulls the helmet off him, his spirit, or he doesn't have the helmet on him at the end of it. And he goes is it over kind of thing. Because he wasn't in control after a point. He was just there.
Watching it through his own eyes, right?
Yeah, kind of like how when he killed Sylvanas and set her right on to Quel'Thalas about killing all the citizens in there.
Turned her immediately into a super strong banshee and made him murder all his family.
Yeah, and she had no control over it because she was bound to Frostmourne at that time, and then to him and to the Lich King.
Well, Sylvanas could be another day, though. So back to Paladins.
That's going to be a lot.
That's going to be an episode, yeah.
We're going to have to share that episode because you and I are both big fans of her.
Yeah, we are. We're going to have to work together on that one.
It's going to be fun, though. I can't wait till we get to that one.
Very exciting.
Yes. Anyway, Paladins. The once proud Archmage, Kel'Thuzad, wandered the frozen plains of Northrend. With the wind whipping, exiled from the Kirin Tor for his interest in the dark arts, he was haunted by a voice telling him to go to Northrend. Climbing the frozen throne, he offered his soul to the Lich King. With his allegiance to the Lich King, he returned to Lordaeron in secret and founded a cult of the damned. Promising immortality, he was able to recruit using the nobility and lower classes of Lordaeron.
Classic human.
Classic human. Oh, God. The Lordaeron troubles. I will gladly bear any curse to save my homeland. Arthas Menethil. Arthas and Uther traveled to Stranbrad to stop the Orcish raids from those that broke out from their internment camps. During this, the young prince and his companions slew the rogue black drag Cyrenax. Taking the heart, it was forged into the Orb of Fire by Faranor Steeltoe. The gift was used in the battle against the Orcs, ultimately defeating them and killing the Blackrook clan Blade Master. Within a few weeks of Uther and Arthas halting those Orcish raids, Arthas was called again to investigate a new disturbance near the town of Brill. The plague of undeath started to arise from the town. Arthas was joined by Jaina Proudmoore and Captain Falric. As the three reached Brill's granary, they fought against the undead. Managing to make their way into Brill, they met the individual responsible, Kel'Thuzad, who had raised the undead to escape. The trio followed him to the town of Anderhall. By the time they reached the town, it was too late. Kel'Thuzad had already infected the grain, and it was being sent to outlying villages. Before slaying the necromancer, he whispered about his master, Mal'Ganis, which is also the best server in World of Warcraft, it says right here in the tome. With information of this demon, Jaina and Arthas headed for Stratholme.
Imagine being on a server not named after a big scary demon.
I know.
Anyway.
How would you not want to have that? Taking a stop to rest at the town of Hearthglen, the pair were warned of an approaching undead army. In addition, the grain shipment from Anderhall had already arrived and was being consumed as bread by a few of the townsfolk. Those that had eaten the infected bread were put to the sword. This was one of the first steps into Arthas' descent and to become what we know of him today. Shortly after, the army of the undead approached and started to lay siege to the town. Arthas ordered Jaina to seek out Uther and request his aid. As he reinforced the town's defense, Arthas was able to hold off for long enough, almost losing his own battle, before Uther arrived. Ashamed and horrified by this, he quickly left for Stratholme, with Jaina and Uther following. As the trio reached Stratholme, they saw that the words of Kel'Thuzad were true. Mal'Ganis had already infected the population with the plague. This is where Arthas had his crossing the Rubicon moment. The starting point from where he would eventually leave the path of light. Arthas commanded that the city of Stratholme should be purged, before any of its inhabitants could be turned into the undead. Uther, astonished that the opinion would cross the young paladin's mind, refused. Arthas attempted to leverage his nobility and titles to force the choice, yet Uther stood his ground and refused. Considering this disobedience and an act of treason, Arthas relieved Uther of his command and suspended his paladins from service. Moments after being suspended from his command and his paladins from service, as they turned their backs on Arthas, the culling started. Those loyal to Arthas stayed and started slaughtering their own countrymen. In a different part of the city, Mal'Ganis was collecting those that he had turned, while gloating that soon the people of Lordaeron would become the Scourge. Arthas, refusing to let that happen, quickened his pace. Through the slaughter, he and his men killing individuals in their own beds or as they fled. As the two forces continued their butchery of Stratholme, they eventually met face to face. Arthas demanded an end to the conflict, yet Mal'Ganis told Arthas to gather his forces and head to Northrend. Some of these former paladins were now referred to as Death Lords, as they committed the same heinous acts in other cities across Lordaeron, while they defended against an enemy that continued to rise. They were betrayed by Baron Rivendire, who was sending tainted food supplies throughout the realm. It was found by Sir Thomas, who we know as the Headless Horseman. But at the time, he was a paladin who was stationed at a village that ended up being turned due to the provided food shipment. It was reported to the Silver Hand and dealt with.
That's a good little cameo into the Hollow's End there. That's cool. Yeah.
There's a lot of little bits that just come from the Paladin's timeline. Arthas, in the meantime, was in Northrend. With his sanity breaking, he quested to end the plague and Mal'Ganis. Arthas, in time, fell prey to the machinations of the Lich King, picking up the sword Frostmourne and dropping his warhammer. Little did Arthas know that in that time he had become a Death Knight and lost his soul to the sword. As his men continued wanting to return home, even Uther and his father sending messengers to return. Arthas set fire to his ships and slaughtered all of his men in the First Legion. Eventually Arthas did return home to Lordaeron. As the gates opened, he entered into the passageway before the throne room, his armor no longer glistening with the light. It had turned cold and hard, like the winds and ice of Northrend, his blonde hair now white as the mountain tops. Marching into the throne room, he greeted his father, with his arm on his shoulder and the other on Frostmourne. Looking at his son in the eyes, he asked, "What are you doing?" As he raised his sword, Arthas replied, "Succeeding you, father," and plunged the sword into his father. When Arthas did come to retrieve and revive the necromancer, Gavin Rand stood in the way and paid the price, having his soul ripped from his body to feed the sword Frostmourne. As they inspected the remains, it was mentioned by Tichondrius that a special urn was needed to transport the body of the necromancer as he was too far decomposed. Arthas headed to retrieve the urn from the paladins Ballard the Bright and Sage the Truthbearer, as Arthas quickly dispatched both of them. Though it was Uther, his former mentor, that stood between Arthas and the urn. As the two conversed, it turned out that the urn carried Arthas' father's ashes, but without a care in the world, the two fought. In a battle for what would be the fate of Lordaeron, each weapon blow erupted a showering of warring energies, a true struggle between life and death. Arthas, almost losing to Uther, took advantage of his hesitation and seized his soul with Frostmourne. As Arthas left Ander Hall with his dead necromancer and enchanted urn, a contingent of paladins of the Silver Hand, led by Deval Crockford, allied themselves with the defenders of Darrowshire, led by Captain Joseph Redpath. Despite the paladins' successful efforts in steadying the line and holding back the undead, they ended up being defeated by the Death Knight Marduk the Black, who later served as a tutor in Shadowlands until a group of adventurers came by. After learning of the deaths of Tyrannus and Uther, Alexandros returned from Ironforge with the holy sword known as Ashbringer. Empowered by the holy light, it only leaves ash in the wake of the undead. As paladins reached out to the quarantine lands in hopes of assisting the plague-ridden colonies, they were continuously persecuted by the populace. Some of these paladins headed to Northrend. Reaching the icy fortress of Ner'zhul, they became embittered through the trials they had to suffer through, becoming bound to the Lich King after his offers of untold power in exchange for their loyalty. These fallen paladins became Death Knights. As the war raged on, the Silver Hand and its paladins helped in various ways, such as during the destruction of Dalaran, assisting in the defense and leading survivors to ships. Some of these paladins would join them and make their way to Kalimdor, and take part in the last fight against the Burning Legion. The surviving paladins joined the remaining human resistance. Detachments of these paladins rose from the ruins of Lordaeron to form the resistance, protecting those who fled to Dalaran under the control of Grand Marshal Gryathos and the Alliance resistance. Several months after the battle for Mount Hyjal and Archimonde fell, various paladins guarded the ruined Lordaeron Palace Gardens. Led by Daegrin the Orc Slayer, Mulgroth the Defender, and Hylik the Lightbringer, they directed the crippling force, Defenders of Justice, in the Circle of Holy Light. However, even with their combined efforts, they were not enough to stand up to Arthas, Kel'Thuzad, and Sylvanas. Allowing the Scourge to destroy the resistance, some paladins survived the massacre and were rallied by Dagran to join the ranks of the human settlers. They traveled to Kalimdor under the orders of Lord Admiral Dalian Proudmoore. This marked the start of the invasion of Durotar. Note, this action was actually taken on by Dalian Proudmoore by himself due to his hatred for orcs and their people. Before they landed in Durotar, there was actually a peace between the orcs and humans in Kalimdor. Those paladins that remained in Lordaeron continued to fight against the Scourge for a few years, under the control of Lord Commander Saidan Dathrohan and High Lord Alexandrus Mograine. The Knights of the Silver Hand banded together and continued the war against the undead. This band started to crack in the leadership when Lord Maxwell Tyrosus suggested that for the Silver Hand to retake its lost cities, they should recruit from the Night Elves, Dwarves, and Gnomes. Other leaders disagreed, stating that the fate of Lordaeron is in the affairs of men.
Yeah, don't ask for help.
Right.
It's like, wait till we talk about the Gilneans. Anyway.
They utilized Hearthglen as a rallying point to offer refuge. Over the years, they were able to gain some victories against the undead. The greater worry was that the Forsaken would entrench themselves into the ruins of Lordaeron. Just a side note here, there is a difference, if you don't know, between Forsaken and Scourge. Although both undead, the Forsaken have a conscience and are actually more like a human, just undead, whereas the Scourge do not, and they're following blindly.
Right, like the Scourge are under the will of the Lich King, or under the Forsaken have broken free of that will one way or another. There's all kinds of examples we won't get into now, but
no, later time. But it's just a note that they are not interchangeable. Paladins made another base in the now abandoned monastery of Tristfog Glades. Later, it would be known as the Scarlet Monastery. They also made an alliance with Lord Valdemar of Tyr's Hand, extending their protection to the fortified city from daily attacks of the undead. Sadly, during an attack on Stratholme, Lord Commander Sadian Drothrohan was killed. His corpse was possessed like a fleshy costume by the Dreadlord Balnazar, who started slowly working against the Order's objectives from the inside. Being on the inside, the plans of Varimathras could start to unfold. In time, the worry that the Ashbringer could destroy the Forsaken before his plans could finish, Varimathras had Balthazar arrange Alexandros' death. Through the manipulation and corruption of his son, Renault Mograine, he led his father and Fairbanks to Stratholme, where they were ambushed by an army of undead. Fairbanks, being the first to fall but not killed, quietly witnessed Renault's betrayal, as Alexandros slew the undead that were laying in wait. Having slain the last of them, exhausted and unable to stand, he fell to his knees, dropping Ashbringer at his side. Coming from behind, his son grabbed Ashbringer, raising it above his head and slamming it through his father's heart, cursing the blade and killing Alexandros. His death shocked the Paladins and fractured the already breaking group. Later, the corpse of Alexandros and Ashbringer would be recovered by Kel'Thuzad, who raised them into undeath and transformed him into the leader of the Four Horsemen, while wielding the cursed Ashbringer. The possessed Sadian Dathrohan took what was left of the Silver Hand in Lordaeron and created the Scarlet Crusade. Going from their focus on defending the light and those it shines on to a fanatical cult that despised all non-human races and only wanted to see evil destroyed regardless of the means used to do so. Some Paladins were outright disgusted with the Scarlet Crusade and their immoral zealotry, believing that their fellow Paladins had fallen from their once noble purpose, left to form the Argent Dawn, taking a less extreme approach to remain faithful to the principles of the light and accepted races from all across Azeroth. As the Third War came to a close, the spiritual hub for the Church of Light started to become this very cathedral, the Cathedral of Light in Stormwind. Though having a spiritual hub, the Knights of the Silver Hand were still scattered, that is until one unfortunate day. As adventurers sent by Tirion Fordring to help his son Talion see the corruption that was the Scarlet Crusade, as Talion attempted to flee Hearthglen, he was followed by the Grand Inquisitor Azalian. Just moments away from being reunited with his father, Talion was cut down. Overcome with rage at the sight of his son's falling, Tirion avenged his son's death, killing the Grand Inquisitor where he stood. Grieving over his son, Tirion made a vow to reform the Knights of the Silver Hand, shaped in the ideals of old, one of honor, justice, and the holy light.
Oh, that's really sweet, actually. It's pretty interesting that there's a lot of corrupted paladins, and there's a lot of undeath, and there's a lot of problems, but there really are some paladins that really, really do follow the light and love honor, justice, and the holy light, right?
That's why I love Tirion. He's such, he sticks to the morals of being a paladin. Arthas, falls to the corruption of Frostmourne, and his problem is he became obsessed with getting Kel'Thuzad, and that obsession led him to where he ended up becoming Lich King.
So my question is, where are we at in the timeline here?
We're starting into World of Warcraft. As noted, it said, we just mentioned an adventurer is sent by Tirion Fordring, so that starts when we get to the player character.
Right, when the player character has a point in the lore. So that's why I was sniffing. There's a little bit of World of Warcraft happening here, I think.
Yes, so we're starting to get out of the RTS and into the World of Warcraft.
That's why this is really interesting. We have progressed into the new type of storytelling that we've adapted since 2004.
Yes, where it's always an adventurer, the champions, or a group.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I'll let you get back at it. I don't mean to interrupt you. Thank you guys for being with us this far. I hope you're having a good time. And let's resume.
Along with the Scarlet Crusade and Argent Dawn, another faction for the Paladins arose to challenge the Silver Hand. The Blood Knight Order, a group of paladins who came in power in the restored elven lands of northern Lordaeron. This order gained their power of light from Prince Kael'thas Sunstrider's gift, the Naru Maru. Once this being was pacified, Ladrin, a former priestess, was selected as matriarch of the Blood Knight Order, getting their power from the Bound Naru, which is also, if you don't know, where the Blood Elves start to get their ability to have the light. The Dark Portal opened once more in the Blasted Lands. The Knights of the Silver Hand were ready. A battalion of knights, led by Lord Aurelian Trueblade, launched an expedition into Outland to provide assistance in securing the other side. When a single paladin was accused of desertion, Jared Mace, who had returned with grave news of an approaching army of fell orcs and nether dragons, having Trueblade give his word for the paladin and urging Commander Duran to place the paladins on high alert. Soon after, their defenses were shored up. Ragnarok Bloodreaver approached with his army to face off the combined forces of the Alliance, the Eldor, Silver Hand, Horde, and Broken Troops. The two forces clashed at the base of the Dark Portal. As the battle raged on, Jared found himself fighting against Ragnarok. In the middle of battle, Jared called upon the light to judge Ragnarok. Swinging the killing blow, Jared's hammer struck Ragnarok and disintegrated him instantly. Without their leader, Ragnarok's army retreated from the Stairs of Destiny. As the events of the Burning Crusade continue, the Paladins played various roles throughout the campaign in the Outland. Sometime after the Outland campaign had closed, High Lord Tirion Fordring emerged from Light's Hope Chapel to defend the Holy Ground against the Scourge with other knights and paladins. Unleashing the holy fury onto the armies of the undead, nothing seemed to stop them. As the forces faced off against each other, it was only a matter of time before High Lord Darian Mograine was kneeling before Tirion, offering words of wisdom as he challenged the Lich King himself, calling him a coward and not standing on the field with his Death Knights. As Tirion and Darian continued to speak, the soul of his father appeared behind Darian Mograine. With the consecrated ground that Darian was standing on, his own childlike soul appeared and conversed with his father. As the two finished speaking, Arthas appeared behind his father's soul, feeding it into Frostmourne. Having been filled with rage against the Lich King, he attempted to strike at him, only to be thrust aside with a single swing, bringing Frostmourne to bear against the defenseless Tirion, attempting to seize his soul as well. Those remaining Death Knights and Paladins raised their arms against the Lich King. As Tirion focused on fighting against the darkness Frostmourne had over him, Darian Mograine called out his name, tossed the cursed Ashbringer. In an instant, the sword became cleansed, and Tirion stood, taking a step and leaping swing with the reborn sword at Arthas, knocking him back. Completely in shock from what he had just saw, Arthas retreated with his remaining forces. Still, on the field of battle, Tirion proclaimed that the Argent Dawn and Order of the Silver Hand would come together as one, calling this new group the Argent Crusade, their task to take the fight to Arthas and tear down the walls of Icecrown Citadel. At the start of the war against the Scourge, Tirion set foot at Valgrad in Northrend. disguised as a cleric of the Crusade. The Ashbringer was brought to Northrend separately through an envoy of the Silver Hand named Ares the Oathbound. During the transport, though, Ares took a fatal wound from an undead, being helped by an adventurer who retrieved the artifact in the Utgrad catacombs, and with his dying breath, told them to deliver the weapon to Lord Aurelian Trueblade. After Ashbringer was returned and reunited with Tirion, revealing his identity, and declared that the Order of the Silver Hand had arrived. The Paladins, alongside other forces in Northrend, would slowly advance their lines to Icecrown, where the final battle between Arthas and Tirion would take place. As multiple forces stormed Icecrown, making their way to the top of the spire where Arthas stood ready. As the last fight atop the spire took place, in the heat of battle many fell, and Tirion was cased in a block of ice, praying to the light, asking for one more ounce of strength to break free from his bonds. In an instant, the ice shattered. With Ashbringer in hand, Tirion leaped to Arthas, who in an attempt to parry the attack, when Ashbringer struck Frostmourne, it shattered the unholy sword, letting free the souls it had claimed, one of which was his father, Tenorus Menethil. As Arthas lay defeated, the soul of his father knelt next to the son he was once proud of, his eyes changing from the blue glow to his natural green. Sharing his last words with his father, Arthas' hand slipped, hitting the icy ground, closing his eyes and laying his son's head gently on the ground. Tenorus stood, looking at Tirion, who had the helm of domination in his hands, informed him that there must always be a Lich King. Knowing the weight and sacrifice required of such a burden, Tirion almost placed the helm on his head. Someone shouting his name, who had already sat atop the frozen throne. Bolvar Fordring, a once proud paladin, now charred beyond recognition from the red dragons bringing him back to life.
One of my very, very, very favorite paladins of all time. That's
Really?
An enormous sacrifice. Yeah, that's insane.
As Tirion placed the helm on his head, Bolvar instructed that no one must know that he wears the helm in order to keep it safe, and banished Tirion from ever returning. For a few years, there was a bit of peace in Azeroth following the fall of the Lich King. Yet, from the eternal plain of Deepholm, Deathwing awoke from his slumber, having recovered from his wounds. He erupted into the world, causing an explosion so large that it tore a rip between Azeroth and the elemental plane, causing the cataclysm. Those paladins who remained loyal to the Alliance were sent to the Black Rook depths, prevent the deaths of their allies, and fight against the Dark Iron Clan and Twilight Hammer. Just a side note too, after Cataclysm, there isn't much paladin lore in Mists of Pandaria or in Warlords of Draenor.
Yeah, thank you for the context. Awesome.
Yeah. During the battle for the Broken Shore, all in Azeroth gathered to fend off the third invasion of the Legion. Tirion, along with the Argent Crusade, took up their arms alongside the Alliance and Horde. Tirion and the Argent Crusade had charged forward to take the fight to Gul'dan. As groups of adventurers rushed to support these holy knights, they crest the hill only as Tirion was left floating above a pit of fel. Held in place by Gul'dan, with the holy light shielding him from whatever dark magic Gul'dan was using, Tirion shouted to the new arrivals to stay back. In an instant, the Doomlord Croesus rose from the pool below him. The demon let out a massive breath, imbued with fel magic, cracking the holy shield. With his last breath, still believing the light would protect him, Tirion went limp and fell into the pool of fel. With their spirits holding on, the armies continued their advance on the Broken Shore. As the battle raged on, the Horde, with Sylvanas, held off the cliff face as the Alliance continued below. Within a matter of minutes, the armies of the Legion were beating back the rear guard of the Horde, almost to the point of overrunning them. In an instant, their war chief Vol'jin took a spear in the stomach. Still alive, he broke it with his dagger, while his other slew the beast that stabbed him. Falling to the ground, Sylvanas rode to the war chief, with his dying breath telling her not to let the Horde die this day. From below, the Alliance had called in their gunship to finish the fight. As they looked up, hearing Sylvanas' horn blowing as she called in the Valkyr, the Alliance started to retreat to their gunship. Laughing, Gul'dan called in a massive fel reaver, attaching itself to the ship. King Varian, holding onto the rope ladder leading to the deck, released it, falling into the fel reaver and killing it with a single blow. Falling to the ground, he faced off countless fel beasts. He continued to fight until being forced to his knees while Gul'dan ripped him apart with fel magic. The armies crippled, their heroes lost, and their spirits hopelessly clinging on. Both armies retreated from the field of battle. After the disastrous defeat at the Broken Shore, Lord Maxwell Tyrosus came into contact with an unknown paladin hero. Together, they plotted to reunite those who still held their conviction to save the homeland. This unknown adventurer sought out to retrieve various holy artifacts, one of which was Ashbringer, taking them back to the Broken Shore in search of Tyrion's body. Having retrieved both Tyrion's body and the Ashbringer, they returned to Light's Hope Chapel. Inside the Sanctum of Light, a ceremony took place as Tirion was laid to rest with his fellow heroes of the light. In addition, other paladins were called from across Azeroth to reform the Silver Hand, now made up of paladins of Stormwind, Ironforge, and the remnants of the Argent Crusade, Hand of Argus, Blood Knights, and the Sunwalkers, each pledging themselves to the Order's loyalty to this unknown paladin hero, now the new High Lord as Tyrion's heir. And there we go. That is pretty much the paladin lore up to Dragonflight. There's not a lot after Legion happens. There's not a lot that happens in Battle for Azeroth and all that.
It's really cool. You get to return the Ashbringer and bring Tyrion's body back. There's a lot of really cool things.
Yeah. Well, that's when they started doing the what were those? The artifact weapons and stuff. So it always had to be something that was highly important to the game, which I thought was really sweet that you get to bring back Tirion and Ashbringer and like put him to rest kind of thing. It's really sweet.
Goodness gracious, Nick, what an expectation they have for me to teach them about dragons now. You did such a great job teaching them about paladins.
Thank you.
You leaked a good place into Arthas. I think we have a lot to chew on.
Yeah, I'd like to take this farther and do more of a deep dive into Arthas, Tirion, all the other paladins that are mentioned throughout this. This was kind of a start point for me to kick off lore where I want to just start digging into it. And like there's some like the Headless Horseman. I don't think there's much information about him besides what I'd put in there. Right. Some have a vastly deeper lore behind them that can wrap up into it, and we'll probably talk about them later. Like I know I want to do an Arthas episode. I want to do a Tirion episode. So we'll see as time comes how big those get. Because if they're too small, we may just do them together or various NPCs together.
Yeah, we could do 15, 30-minute, like, short recaps of people, too. We'll see. The truth of it is, we want questions. Actually, this last week, we talked about how we didn't have enough tavern talk, right? Yeah. So we can add some of the comments on our lore episode in the tavern talk, and we can really get into it and talk about it.
And even then, what do you, the listener, want to hear about lore-wise?
Is this a good vibe? Do you want this to be more like an audiobook? Do you want it to be more like a podcast? Like, for real, let us know.
Exactly. We're taking stabs at this in the dark, and unless we hear back from you, we won't know what you want to listen to. And we're here for you, the listener.
And Nick did an enormous amount of preparation for this, so we are trying to do this in a cohesive way.
Yes.
And we'll be moving forward. Something else we talked about was we were going to do some more trivial, some new player stuff, how to sim your characters, stat priorities. We're going to start posting some of these videos on YouTube we were thinking about.
Yep.
We're going to work on making sure that happens too. So we'll have a good separation of news every week, good grounding, and then we will also have a place where, they talked about simming your character this week, or what does that mean? We'll have a video about what that means.
Yeah, but it'll be good. I think in the long run, we got a lot of stuff coming down the pipeline that I think everybody's going to enjoy.
So yeah, I think that covers up the Paladins. Like I said, ask us questions in the comments. Nick has been doing an awesome job communicating with the community. I got to get better about that myself. But make sure you comment on the video, comment on Spotify, ask us questions. We want stuff to talk about. So, Nick, I think it's time. Time to wrap this up. Would you send us out?
I can, definitely. This has been another episode of the Valley of Spirits with your hosts and favorite Horde players, Jordan and Nick. You can find us in Veldraken on the Melgana server. You can find our guild by searching for the Electric Boogaloo. You can also find us on Facebook, X, Twitter, YouTube, whatever kids are using these days, by searching the Valley of Spirits podcast. And as always, for the Horde.
For the Horde.